"Get out of my house, old woman," my daughter-in-law sneered as she tossed my suitcase down the steps. My son Michael didn't even flinch. He stood there with his expensive watch glinting under the porch light, the same watch I had gifted him when he graduated from law school. Only now his eyes were colder than I'd ever seen. Their plan was simple: push me out the moment his $85 million inheritance cleared into his account. They thought they had won. But that night, as they popped champagne in the dining room of my home, I was already sitting in my car across the street, a very special plan taking shape in my mind. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're watching from, because this isn't just a story of betrayal. It's a story of a mother who refused to disappear. The night air felt sharp against my skin as I sat gripping the steering wheel, the shadows of the trees stretching long across the quiet neighborhood. That house behind me wasn't just walls and brick. It was the home I had built after losing my husband to a sudden heart attack 27 years ago. I was 52 then, a widow with a son who still clung to my skirts when nightmares woke him at night. Every penny I earned teaching, every extra shift I took tutoring children who could barely spell, went into that home. I didn't buy fancy clothes or expensive jewelry. I invested in Michael's future. And as I sat there watching the glow of his windows, I wondered how that little boy had grown into this man who looked at me like I was disposable. It hadn't always been this way. In the early years, Michael was everything a mother could ask for: bright, ambitious, respectful. He had a laugh that carried through rooms, a way of making people believe in him. I remember when he got his first scholarship letter, he ran through the house waving it over his head like a golden ticket. I hugged him so tight I thought my ribs would crack. That was the moment I believed all the sacrifices, the nights I went without dinner so he could have seconds, the mornings I walked 3 miles to work to save bus fare, had been worth it. He was going to make something of himself. And he did. But sometimes success reveals the shadows in people rather than the light. Michael became a lawyer, then a partner, and before I knew it, he had married Allison. She was beautiful, I'll give her that. Tall, always dressed like she had stepped out of a magazine, her blonde hair never out of place, her smile sharp as glass. From the beginning, I felt her measuring me, assessing me, as though she were cataloging what I owned, what I earned, what I meant. She wasn't interested in my stories about his childhood, or the years I had carried him on my back while working 2 jobs. No, Allison was interested in the future, in Michael's money, in his inheritance, in what being part of our family name could buy her. When Michael's father died, he left behind investments and properties. I had managed them for years, careful, steady, never reckless. I could live comfortably, but I never touched the big accounts. I knew they were for Michael's future. I thought he knew too. And maybe he did once. But people like Allison don't settle for future. They want everything now. So when the inheritance finally reached $85 million, it was like watching a switch flip. The boy I raised vanished, replaced by a man who looked at me like an obstacle. It started small, the way poison always does. Allison suggesting that I downsize to a smaller place, that a big home was too much for someone my age. Michael laughing along, saying it would be practical. They framed it like concern, but concern doesn't come with whispers when they think you've left the room. I caught snippets: she doesn't need that much space, think of what we could do if. At first, I pushed it aside. I told myself they were stressed, that money makes people talk foolishly. But then came the dinners where Allison controlled the conversation, cutting me off whenever I spoke. The way Michael stopped calling me mom, and started calling me mother, like I was a client. The final blow was tonight, being shoved out like yesterday's trash, as if my years of sacrifice had evaporated the moment the wire transfer hit his account. I sat in my car, the keys cold in my hand, and the weight of it all pressed down on me. I should have cried. I should have felt broken. But instead, I felt something else, something I hadn't felt since those days after my husband's death, when I had to rebuild from nothing. A fire. The kind that starts small but burns hotter with every breath. They thought $85 million made them powerful. What they didn't realize was that money is only as strong as the foundation beneath it. And I was that foundation. I had knowledge, documents, and access they didn't even know existed. My late husband had trusted me to guard our wealth until the time was right. Michael thought that time had come. But it hadn't. Not for him. Not yet. I turned the key and drove away from the glow of their party. The road stretched out before me, lined with memories I couldn't shake. The park where Michael had played soccer as a boy, where I had cheered until my throat was raw. The diner where I once took him for pancakes after his first heartbreak, letting him cry without judgment. Each place passed like a ghost, whispering what once was. By the time I reached the edge of town, the fire inside me had hardened into something sharper, resolve. They wanted me gone. But they had no idea that my absence was the very thing that would undo them. I pulled into the driveway of my oldest friend, Marjorie. She was already standing on the porch, her cardigan wrapped around her, her sharp eyes scanning me the way she always had since we were girls. She didn't ask questions, just ushered me inside, sat me down, and poured me tea. When I told her what happened, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I warned you about Allison," she said softly. "But you never listened. You thought Michael would see through her. She wasn't cruel, just honest. And she was right. I had thought love would be enough. But love doesn't stand a chance against greed when greed is fed every day." That night, as the clock ticked past midnight, Marjorie and I opened a box of old files I had kept locked away. Bank documents. Titles. Proof of every sacrifice made. Proof of every dollar earned. And tucked between them, my husband's final letter, his instructions on what to do if Michael ever turned his back on me. He had known somehow. He had written, "If the day comes when Michael forgets who raised him, you must remember who you are." My hands trembled as I held that paper, the weight of his foresight grounding me. I wasn't just a discarded old woman. I was the gatekeeper of a legacy they had no right to claim. As dawn approached, I realized my plan wasn't just about revenge. It was about teaching them, Michael and Allison both, that betrayal has consequences. They thought they had erased me. They thought wealth gave them control. But they had underestimated the one person who had given them everything they had. And as the sun rose, spilling light across the world that had just shifted beneath my feet, I whispered to myself, "It's my turn now." The next morning, I woke with a clarity that startled even me. Grief had no place anymore, it had burned away, leaving only determination. I sat at Marjorie's kitchen table with a pen and a yellow legal pad, the kind I used when I balanced bills decades ago. My handwriting was slower now, not as neat as it once was, but the words that spilled onto the page were steady. Names, dates, amounts, documents I still had tucked away in the safe at the bank. Each note was a reminder that Michael and Allison had not inherited control. They had inherited the illusion of it. And illusions shatter when struck with the right truth. Marjorie shuffled in, still in her slippers, her gray hair pulled back in a bun that had half collapsed in the night. She set down a mug of coffee in front of me and studied my list. "You're building something," she said, her voice carrying that mix of curiosity and approval she reserved for my boldest ideas. "Yes," I replied. "A wall so strong they'll never climb it again." I thought back to the early days of Michael's career. When his firm first opened its doors, I had invested quietly, not for profit, but because I wanted him to have every chance. I knew the right strings to pull, the right investors to court, the regulations to navigate. He thought those deals just appeared for him, like magic. But I had orchestrated them behind the scenes. My late husband had always said I had a head for business sharper than most men at their prime. He was right. And it was that very sharpness Michael now believed he no longer needed. What he didn't know was that those same investors and contacts still trusted me more than they trusted him. They remembered the woman who had honored her word when others had failed. After breakfast, I drove to the bank, my pulse steady as I handed over the key to my safety deposit box. The clerk, a young man with glasses slipping down his nose, disappeared into the back room and returned with the long metal drawer. When he slid it open on the table, the smell of old paper and polished steel rose like a memory. Inside were deeds, stock certificates, letters my husband had signed in careful script. But most importantly, there was the one document I knew Michael and Allison had no clue existed, a secondary trust my husband and I had established, independent of the estate Michael now controlled. It was worth far more than the inheritance he had celebrated. And it was mine to decide how to use. I touched the folder, the weight of it grounding me. My husband had been meticulous, a planner to his last breath. He had warned me never to reveal this trust until I was certain of someone's loyalty. I had kept it quiet all these years, thinking I might pass it to Michael one day when he proved himself worthy. But his actions had made my decision simple. This trust would never be his. I slipped the folder into my bag, closed the box, and thanked the clerk. As I walked out into the morning sunlight, I felt lighter, as though the keys to my future were jingling softly in my purse. That afternoon, I called an old friend I hadn't spoken to in years. His name was Samuel Jennings, a retired judge who had known my husband and me when we were young. His voice crackled over the phone, deep and firm despite the years. "Well, well," he said. "If it isn't Evelyn Carter. To what do I owe the honor?" I told him everything, every detail from the shredded loyalty to the eviction. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, there was silence, then a long sigh. "You always did have a way of finding storms, Evelyn," he murmured. "But I'll tell you this, if you want to protect what's yours, you came to the right person. I know exactly the kind of paperwork we'll need." We agreed to meet the next morning at his office, though he was long retired. He still kept a room at the courthouse for consulting. When I hung up the phone, Marjorie arched an eyebrow. "You're going to war," she said. "Yes," I answered, "but not the kind they'll see coming." That evening, I drove past Michael's house. My house. The curtains were drawn, but I could see shadows moving inside, Allison's tall frame, Michael's broader shoulders. Their laughter drifted faintly through the night, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel pain at the sound. I felt anticipation. They believed they had locked me out. What they didn't realize was that the front door was just one entrance. I knew the back alleys, the windows, the cracks in their fortress. And I intended to use every one. Later, as I lay awake in Marjorie's guest room, the ceiling fan spinning lazily above me, I let memories flood in. The day I signed the deed to the house. Michael's small hands tugging at my skirt when he was scared of the dark. Allison's first dinner at our table, when she leaned too hard into compliments and avoided questions about herself. The pieces had always been there. I had ignored them, blinded by love and the hope that family meant loyalty. But love without respect is just a chain, and that chain had finally broken. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready. The next morning, I dressed carefully, not in morning clothes, not in defeat. I chose a navy blazer my husband had always said made me look like I belonged in a boardroom, and a string of pearls I had inherited from my mother. I looked in the mirror, adjusted my collar, and whispered to my reflection, "You are not done." Marjorie drove me to the courthouse, her knuckles white on the steering wheel, but her smile unwavering. "Give them hell," she said as I stepped out. Inside, Samuel greeted me with that familiar firm handshake, his eyes scanning my face with quiet recognition. "You haven't changed much," he said, though we both knew I had. He laid out folders across his desk, thick with forms and statutes. "We'll start by solidifying control of your secondary trust," he explained. "Then we'll put measures in place to ensure your son has no legal standing to touch it. After that, we can explore other options." He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "How far are you willing to go, Evelyn?" I met his gaze without flinching. "As far as I need to." We spent hours combing through papers, drafting agreements, securing protections. Every signature I laid down felt like a nail sealing shut the door Michael and Allison had tried to walk through. By the time I left, the sun was dipping low, painting the courthouse steps gold. I carried the documents in my bag, and with each step, I felt taller, stronger. This wasn't about bitterness anymore. This was about reclaiming my place, about showing them that betrayal doesn't erase the years of sacrifice that built the ground they walk on. When I returned to Marjorie's, the phone was already ringing. It was Michael. I let it go to voicemail, but curiosity tugged at me, so I listened. His voice was smooth, practiced, almost rehearsed. "Mother, I hope you're settling in somewhere comfortable. Allison and I just want what's best for you. It's time you enjoyed a smaller place, less responsibility. We'll take care of the house, the investments, everything. Don't worry about a thing." His words dripped with the kind of politeness that disguises venom. I played the message twice, then deleted it. He thought he was the one in control. He had no idea the ground beneath him was already shifting. As I sat by the window that night, watching the moonlight wash over Marjorie's roses, I realized something important. This wasn't just about teaching Michael a lesson. It was about protecting the legacy I had built, ensuring it went to hands that valued it, not ones that saw it as a trophy. And more than that, it was about proving to myself that I was not finished, that age had not erased me, that betrayal had not broken me. They thought they had won. They had no idea the real game had just begun. I didn't hear from Michael for several days after that message, but Allison filled the silence in her own way. She sent me a text, written in that clipped, efficient tone of hers. "We'll need you to sign over some documents for the investment properties soon. It's easier if it's in our names now. Less confusion later." No greeting, no kindness, just instructions, as though I were her employee. I didn't reply. Instead, I saved the message. Every word of hers was a seed she didn't know she was planting, seeds that would grow into proof of their intentions. Marjorie noticed the fire building in me. "You're not just angry anymore," she said one morning as she buttered toast in her kitchen. "You're planning." I didn't deny it. She smiled, a little sadly. "Good. They think you're fragile. Show them your steel." I drove back into town later that day and parked outside my old house. I didn't get out of the car, just sat there watching the life they had moved into. The curtains were new, the shutters painted white. Allison had always preferred sleek surfaces, no character, no history. I saw men unloading furniture from a truck, glass tables, leather couches, the kind of things that looked expensive but meant nothing. Watching it, I realized they were stripping the house of its memory, turning it into a showroom. And they thought they were clever enough to erase me from it. I smiled to myself. Let them redecorate. Let them pour money into every room. I had already begun the steps to make sure not 1 square foot of it would remain theirs. The next morning, I met with Samuel again. His office smelled faintly of old leather and dust, the way wisdom often does. He leaned back in his chair as I laid Allison's message on his desk. "She put this in writing?" he asked, his eyebrows lifting. I nodded. He tapped the paper with one finger. "They're greedy. And greed leaves trails." He began drafting a letter, not one to send to Michael, but one addressed to a colleague of his still active in probate law. "If we need to contest their actions, this will help us. But Evelyn," he paused, his eyes serious, "I think you're after more than just protection." He was right. Protection was the minimum. What I wanted was exposure. I wanted Michael and Allison to feel the sting of knowing they hadn't outsmarted me, that the woman they had shoved out the door still held every card. So I told Samuel my plan. Slowly, carefully, I laid out how I wanted to redirect the secondary trust, how I wanted to shift assets into funds that would leave Michael with nothing but regret. He listened, his expression unreadable, then finally nodded. "It's bold," he said. "And perfectly legal. If that's what you want, I'll help you do it." Walking out of his office that day, I felt the world sharpening around me. The streets looked clearer, the noise of traffic less distracting. When betrayal burns away the illusions, what's left is a kind of vision you can't ignore. Every step I took felt like the drumbeat of something inevitable. That evening, as the sky dimmed into violet, I received another call from Michael. This time, I answered. His voice was soft, almost rehearsed. "Mother, Allison tells me you've been difficult. Why are you dragging this out? You know the house is mine now. The inheritance is mine. It's what Dad wanted." His words struck me like cold water, not because they were true, they weren't, but because he had convinced himself they were. "Michael," I said slowly, "your father wanted you to succeed, yes. But he never wanted you to forget me in the process." There was silence on the line. Then, a faint laugh. "You'll see, Mother. This is what's best. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." He hung up before I could respond. I sat there in the quiet, the weight of his arrogance pressing against me. He thought I was being difficult. He had no idea he was walking straight into the storm I was preparing. 2 days later, I made my first move. With Samuel's guidance, I transferred the bulk of the secondary trust into a new foundation, one dedicated to providing scholarships for women over 40 starting businesses. It wasn't just about protecting money. It was about channeling it where it mattered. Every form I signed, every clause I initialed, was like a blade carving Michael and Allison out of the future they thought was theirs. Samuel chuckled when he slid the final papers back into his briefcase. "By the time they realize, the ink will be too dry to smudge," he said. Marjorie and I celebrated quietly that night with tea and butter cookies. "You look 10 years younger," she told me, studying my face. Maybe it was true. I felt lighter, sharper, alive in a way betrayal had almost stolen from me. "They think they're standing on marble floors," I said softly. "They don't realize it's glass." But the next move came from Allison. She showed up at Marjorie's door one afternoon, her heels clicking like a metronome against the pavement. I hadn't expected her to find me, but then again, snakes always know where to slither. She didn't wait for an invitation, just pushed her way into the kitchen, perfume thick in the air. "Evelyn," she said, her voice dripping false sweetness, "we need to talk." Marjorie crossed her arms, ready to throw her out, but I lifted a hand. I wanted to hear her. Allison sat across from me, crossing one leg over the other, her diamonds catching the light. "Michael and I are trying to help you," she said smoothly. "But if you keep resisting, we'll have no choice but to involve lawyers. You don't want that. It's messy, it's public, and frankly," her smile sharpened, "you won't win." I held her gaze, calm, steady. "Is that what you think?" I asked quietly. She faltered for half a second before regaining her composure. "It's not what I think, Evelyn. It's what I know. You've had your time. It's ours now." I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable. Then I said, "Allison, when people believe something belongs to them, they often forget to check who holds the keys." Her smile slipped, just slightly. She stood quickly, muttering something about being late, and swept out of the house. Marjorie closed the door behind her with a force that rattled the glass. "She's rattled," she said. I nodded. "Good. She should be." That night, I went through the recordings my husband had left, voice memos on an old cassette tape he had kept hidden in his desk. In one of them he said, "If Michael ever forgets where he came from, remember, the world listens to truth louder than it listens to money." I sat there in the dim light of Marjorie's kitchen, the cassette player humming softly, and I knew exactly what my next step would be. The first strike had landed with the trust. The second would be louder, public, undeniable. And when it came, Michael and Allison would finally understand that the woman they had tried to erase was not only still standing, she was holding the pen that would write the ending of their story. The morning I set the second phase of my plan into motion, the sky was heavy with clouds, the kind that seemed to promise a storm but held back just enough to keep you waiting. I drove downtown, the city streets humming with life, and pulled up outside the glass building where the Regional Financial Journal kept its offices. I hadn't been there in years, not since they ran a feature about the scholarship program I started in my husband's name. Back then, Michael had been so proud, bragging to his friends that his mother was the woman in the paper. Now I would make sure he saw my name in print again, this time in a way that would scorch his pride. Inside, I was greeted by a young receptionist with too much eyeliner and a half-eaten granola bar on her desk. She looked at me like I was someone's grandmother lost in the wrong building. But when I asked to see Gregory Larkin, her posture shifted. Gregory wasn't just a journalist. He was an old mentee of mine, a boy I had once coached when he was barely out of college. I had taught him how to see through numbers, how to smell dishonesty in a ledger the way a dog smells fear. He had built a reputation as a financial watchdog, and I knew he wouldn't turn me away. When he appeared, his beard flecked with gray now, he broke into a grin. "Evelyn Carter," he said warmly, "I was wondering when you'd come knocking." We shook hands, and when he led me back to his office, I wasted no time. I placed a flash drive on his desk and slid it toward him. "What's this?" he asked, curious. "Evidence," I replied, my voice steady. "My son and his wife think they've beaten me. They don't realize I've been watching them longer than they've been plotting." Gregory leaned back, steepling his fingers. "If what you're telling me is true, this could make waves." He paused, studying my face. "Are you sure you're ready for that kind of storm?" I smiled faintly. "Gregory, storms don't scare me. I raised one in my own house." While Gregory scanned the files, I thought back to the years Michael had been growing his career. He'd always had that charm, the way he could make anyone believe in him. But behind charm lies arrogance. I'd seen it in flashes, the way he dismissed waiters, the way he laughed when Allison mocked someone else's misfortune. I had ignored it, hoping it was just the influence of youth or the stress of ambition. Now, seeing Gregory's face harden as he read the documents, the unauthorized account attempts, the proposals Allison had drafted in her own handwriting, the recorded calls they thought I would never find, I knew the truth. My son wasn't just careless. He was entitled to the point of cruelty. Gregory closed the laptop and exhaled. "This is damning," he said. "You could bury them with this." I shook my head. "Not bury. Expose. I want the world to see what they are, but more importantly, I want them to see me standing when the smoke clears." We agreed that he would prepare an investigative feature, one that didn't name Michael directly at first, but painted a clear enough picture that anyone close to him would connect the dots. It would frame the story not as gossip, but as a lesson: the dangers of greed within families, the cost of betrayal when legacies are at stake. He promised me the first draft within the week. As I left his office, the air outside felt lighter. The clouds had finally broken, and sunlight spilled across the pavement. I took that as a sign. Back at Marjorie's house, the phone buzzed again. Another message from Michael. This time, he wasn't calm. His voice trembled with controlled anger. "Mother, I don't know what you're doing, but I can feel you working against us. Don't. You'll regret it." For a moment, I just sat in silence, replaying his words. "Working against us," he said, as if I were the enemy. It was almost laughable. They had forgotten the simplest truth: I was never against them until they turned against me. That night, Allison struck again. She sent me an email filled with polished language, trying to sound professional, as though we were two business partners negotiating a deal. "For everyone's benefit, it's best if you transfer the remainder of your accounts into Michael's name. This will streamline estate matters and protect you in case of cognitive decline." The phrase cognitive decline burned into me like acid. She wanted to paint me as unfit, incapable, fragile. I printed the email and slid it into a folder labeled Evidence. Then I poured myself a glass of wine, raised it to the quiet kitchen ceiling, and whispered, "You've just handed me your downfall." 2 days later, the story broke online. Gregory had been fast, sharper than ever. The headline was neutral but piercing: "Wealth, Legacy, and Betrayal, When Family Turns into Predators." The article didn't name Michael or Allison outright, but it might as well have. Every detail was there: the son who inherited $85 million, the wife who pushed for power, the elderly mother quietly maneuvered out of her own home. By the end of the article, the message was clear: betrayal isn't private anymore. It echoes. The phone exploded with calls and texts. Not from Michael, not at first, but from friends, old colleagues, even distant relatives who had read the piece and wanted to know if it was true. I didn't answer most of them. I didn't need to. The truth had already started doing its work. By evening, my voicemail was full. And at last, Michael's voice cracked through again. This time, he wasn't smooth or composed. He was frantic. "Mother, what did you do? Do you realize what's happening? People are asking questions. My firm is nervous. Allison is furious. Fix this. Fix it now." I sat in Marjorie's quiet living room, the glow of the lamp soft against the curtains, and let his words wash over me. Fix this. He still thought I was the one holding the pieces of his life together. And maybe I was. But now, I was choosing not to. Marjorie looked at me over her knitting, her eyes glinting. "He's scared," she said simply. "Good," I replied. "It's only the beginning." Because the truth was, I hadn't unleashed everything yet. Gregory's article was the first strike, but the real storm was still gathering. And when it broke, Michael and Allison would realize that the fortune they thought they had stolen was nothing more than sand slipping through their fingers. The morning after Gregory's article spread like wildfire, I woke to the sound of my phone vibrating non-stop on the nightstand. Dozens of missed calls, messages stacked one on top of another. Michael. Allison. Even people from the firm. But I didn't feel dread. I felt calm, the kind of calm that comes when the storm you've been waiting for finally arrives. By noon, I heard from Gregory again. "It's moving faster than I expected," he said, his voice low but tinged with awe. "I've had 3 separate outlets ask for interviews. Evelyn, your story struck a nerve. People are calling it a cautionary tale." I thanked him, but inside I was already thinking 3 steps ahead. A public sting was good, but I wasn't done. Exposure was one thing. Stripping them of their power was another. That afternoon, I drove downtown again, this time not to Gregory's office but to Samuel's. He had the documents ready, amendments to the trust, clauses that ensured Michael and Allison couldn't touch a single dime more of what remained. Every line was like a lock snapping into place. "Once this is filed," Samuel explained, "your son has no authority. Not over your estate, not over your finances. And the foundation," he tapped the thick folder, "will run independently. Untouchable." I signed my name with steady strokes. Evelyn Carter. Over and over until the ink seemed to anchor itself into the page. When it was done, I leaned back in my chair and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The work of months, the heartbreak of betrayal, the endless nights of doubt, all of it had crystallized into this: protection, power, freedom. But I still had one final act left to play. That evening, I invited Michael and Allison to meet me at Marjorie's house. I told them it was urgent, that we needed to speak in person. They arrived late, shoulders stiff, Allison's eyes sharp as glass. She sat down across from me, crossing her legs with the poise of someone who still thought she could control the room. Michael hovered behind her, restless, tapping his fingers against the chair. "What is this about?" Allison asked briskly. "The article? That nonsense? We can handle it. It'll fade in a week." I slid a folder across the table. Neither of them touched it, so I opened it myself, pulling out the first document. "This," I said, "is the amended trust. Effective immediately, neither of you have any legal claim to my estate, my accounts, or my assets. You're out." Michael's face drained of color. "What?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "You heard me. You thought you were clever, pushing me out of my home, treating me like a burden. You thought that fortune was yours to spend. But it never was. It was mine. And now it's beyond your reach forever." Allison scoffed, though her hand trembled slightly on her lap. "You can't do that. You're being manipulated. Some lawyer." "Careful," I cut in, my tone sharp enough to slice through her words. "Everything I've done is airtight. Legal. Final. You have nothing left to argue." Then I pulled out the second piece of evidence, the email Allison had sent me, suggesting I sign over accounts due to cognitive decline. I slid it toward Michael. His eyes scanned the words, and I watched his face harden, shame and anger colliding in his expression. "You wrote this?" he hissed at her. Allison shifted uncomfortably but didn't answer. Before the silence could stretch further, I played the last card, the audio file. The one of Michael, recorded weeks ago, saying I wouldn't last much longer, that Allison had already drafted plans to remodel my home. The sound of his own voice filled the room, and he went pale. Allison lunged forward, trying to stop the recording, but it was too late. Every word had already landed. "Do you hear yourselves?" I asked, my voice steady, unshaken. "This is what you became. Greedy. Entitled. Willing to erase me from my own life." I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands in my lap. "Well, you failed. And now you'll live with the fallout." Michael's eyes darted toward me, pleading, but I didn't soften. Allison's mask cracked at last, fury spilling across her face. "You'll regret this," she snapped. "Without us, you'll be alone." I let out a low laugh, not cruel but certain. "No, Allison. Without me, you'll be nothing." I stood then, signaling the conversation was over. They hesitated, as if unsure whether to beg or to fight, but when Marjorie opened the front door, they finally left, their shoulders hunched, their silence louder than any words. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, the stars scattered like diamonds above. My house might have been theirs for now, but the legacy, the real power, was mine again. The foundation was alive, the truth was public, and the world now knew what they had tried to do. Within weeks, the ripples became waves. Michael's firm began losing clients, whispers of the article spreading through boardrooms. Allison's business contacts grew scarce, doors closing faster than she could knock. They had tried to take everything from me. Instead, they were left with ashes. As for me, I moved into a cottage by the sea, not grand, not opulent, but mine. I filled it with books, with flowers, with laughter from the friends who still stood beside me. Some nights, I walked the shoreline, letting the waves wash over my feet, and thought of my husband. "We did it," I whispered to the wind. "We protected everything we built." Betrayal had nearly broken me. But revenge, quiet and precise, had restored me. And when I looked out at the horizon, I knew one truth above all others: they had underestimated me. And that was their greatest mistake.